Hello, everyone. Merry Christmas. Is that too soon? Is it too soon?
No.
Thank you all so much for joining us for our first Christmas card crafting with Debbie. She did a sip and paint in June, but this is our first card crafting event, and we're going to give everyone a few more minutes to get in here. Debbie, this is everyone. Everyone meet Debbie and her husband, Jay. And Debbie's going to just take a minute to make sure you guys have everything you need. First of all, everyone have a drink.
Yeah.
Something snuggly. There we go.
Yeah, just a reminder to grab, you'll need a pair of scissors and a water jug, like a jar or a glass or something. It actually would be helpful to have two if possible, or if you're working with someone, then you can each have one and maybe kind of share a little bit. And some paper towels, just a couple of paper towels you can fold to make a little thing. Dab your paintbrushes. And if you have a pencil, that could be helpful. So you can grab those things if you need them.
I love all the kids. This is fun. Joel's got his whole crew over there.
Yeah, like I can see. Thanks for nephews. Fun.
So which I love to draw. I know you love to draw.
All right, at any point, please feel free if you want to unmute yourself and introduce yourself. If you have any questions for Debbie, this is a pretty family-friendly hangout time, so feel free to do that, or you can drop your questions in the chat as well. Debbie has put in a few pictures in the chat so you can kind of see some of the cards that we're going to be making today.
Right. Yeah. Are people pretty ready? Should we?
I think we're there. I haven't noticed anyone else hopping in, so.
Okay.
Does everyone feel ready? Thumbs up.
Ready to paint? Yeah.
You got thumbs up? All right. Oh, that's so cute. All right, Debbie, I will hand it over to you.
Oh, thanks for joining us today. So I'm Debbie. I am a children's book illustrator, and I love to do watercolor painting. And I also really love to share watercolor painting techniques with people. So I'm going to teach a few watercolor techniques, and we'll make these cards with that. And I also really love Water for Good. So I'm glad to get to be here and be a part of sharing a little bit about Water for Good as well. So we're going to make, as I said, four different watercolor techniques that we'll practice today, and then this reindeer card that we'll do also. So if everybody is ready, what you're going to need to start with is one of these pieces of watercolor paper. So you have in your kit, you have some cards like this, but we're going to use this watercolor paper to paint on. So to start off, take a sheet of paper, and we're just going to make a line this way and this way. And the first technique that we're going to do with watercolor is called wet on dry. So if you want to remind yourself what that is, you can even write at the top, wet on dry, but you don't have to. It's just to remind yourself. So here you have your paints and your brush, and take your brush, and it probably will feel really stiff and hard. So if it feels like that, you'll get it wet in your water and swirl it around until it softens up and it's not crispy anymore. And then you can take some of your clean water and just put some drops in each of the colors of paint to soften them up. like that. And you can use your the cover for the paint tray. I'm going to use that as like a palette. So you can do that as well. So we are going to make some patterns and textures that will be used in our cards. And so wet on wet means that you have water in your paintbrush. So it's wet, or sorry, wet on dry, but your paper is dry. So you can get some paint and you can pick any color you want. I'm going to do some blue, and you can, if you want to mix colors, you can do it right there on the palette. So wet on dry, you have a lot of water in your paintbrush and paint, and then you just paint directly on dry paper. So we're going to start with some patterns, and first let's just do some spots.
Is the echo bothering anyone?
If you have any questions, you can let me know as we're going. You can leave white space in between and go back with other colors later if you want. All right. So it's nice to have two, it's nice to have two water jugs, because then you can wash your paint out in one and then you can get clean water in the other one. So you can wash your brush out and then get another color, and we'll go over it to the next one. I'm going to do some orange. And let's do a different pattern. On this one, we can do some stripes. You can change the color if you want. You can use the edge of your brush to get a really fine line. Oops, finer or thicker. And let's do different color. Oh, green. And over here, let's start with some green lines. Let me know if I'm going too quickly. I can adjust. And it's fun to do watercolor. You don't even have to always clean your brush out, but if you want to change the color slightly, you could grab a little bit of another color. And so I put a little blue and mix it in with the green. I'm going to go down and do, so now I have kind of a blue-green, which we can create like a change, a subtle change in color as we go down. Then I can grab some more blue as we go. So now I have like a gradient of color going down like that. And you can go back and touch in between to sort of provide more of a gradient from green to blue. Let's do one more texture over here. And I think for this one, I'm going to do like, I'm going to grab my yellow, mix it with the green. And I'm going to do some sort of tree branch shapes like this. And I'm grabbing some other green in there, mixing with the yellow. You can even touch back on top of some of the other ones and the color will blend since it's still wet. And watercolor is one thing that's super fun about it is it's so good for layering. So if you wait for these to dry, you can go back on top and do another color over the top. Because they're transparent, it'll create different shades where it overlaps.
And if you are just joining us, which I know a few people are, you can make a gradient like Debbie has, and this is a wet on dry. So just get your paints out and just practice mixing colors a little bit and doing some patterns that she has there.
Great.
Oh, you'll grab your watercolor paper, which is different than the actual like white card. You'll be using this watercolor paper to then paste your images onto the white card. So make sure you're using the watercolor paper provided. If you have questions, drop them in the chat, please.
Awesome. Okay, so this is wet on dry. Now, like I said, you can leave this to, we're going to leave it to dry. And if you are going back and doing this later, you probably won't have time today, but you could go back and add other layers of the same technique on top of this. You can also go back right now, like for this one, if I want to add some other color in there, I could do that now and just add some other spots to sort of fill in those white spaces a little bit. And I'm going to add a little bit more in this one to give it a little more color. I see a dog in the a very cute dog in the feed there. So with watercolor, you can decide if you like really soft muted tones, or if you like really bold, dark. Watercolor the color tends to lighten as it dries. And so if you want your colors really dark, you'll have to kind of make them darker than you even are thinking. All right. See, are people ready to move on to our next technique? Good. You can come back to this later. There will be time if you want to finish more of these at the end, or when we're done doing the demonstration, you'll have time to do that then. So I'm going to set this aside to dry. And our next technique, I think this is my favorite technique, and this is called wet on wet. You can write it to remind yourself. And watercolor is so much about controlling the moisture level of your brush and also the paper. So this gets really fun because we're going to make the paper wet and then see what happens when we put paint on top of wet paper. So I'm taking clean water and I'm painting. It's going to be hard to see, I think, in the video, but I'm painting a rectangle of totally clean water right here. And then I'll get some paint in my paintbrush. I'll start with a really dark color if possible. And it's called wet on wet because there's a lot of water in your brush and paint and a lot of water on the paper. And if you have too much water on the paper, like if you hold it up and you can see there's kind of a big puddle, you can take the edge of your paper towel and just stick it right on there, and it will absorb up the extra if there's too much water. All right, then you take your brush, lots of water, and here you can we're going to start with dots and see what happens. I'm just going to put a dot in. And it's just so fun just to watch the paint spread out like that. And depending on how dry your paper is or how wet it is will determine how much it spreads out. So let's make some dots. I think this is so fun. I could just like paint wet dots all day, I think. So fun. So if you want, you can clean your brush. You can grab a different color and put some other color dots in there, which is a fun little effect. All right. And the next rectangle, gonna do the same thing, get it wet. Here's where if your water jug gets too full of paint, you might need clean water. But on the other side, on the other hand, if you want your background to have a color to it, you could use colored water, painty water for your background, and then put color on top, other color on top. So there's no wrong or right, just different things you can do. Okay, so if you see on this one, on mine, there's too much water and it's like it's about to run off the edge. I'll just take my paper towel and kind of slurp up the extra there. Okay, in this one here that's wet, I'm going to make some lines. So let's see what happens. Like that. Okay, I'm gonna do the next one. And as you can see, watercolor paper, it works it's special paper that's made for taking water, obviously, but it does still sometimes bubble and curl. And there are different techniques if you want the watercolors used to keep the paper flat. And right now, since we're just using small sheets of paper, it's not a big problem. But if you wanted to do something big, you would need some method of securing the paper so it didn't warp too much. Okay, let's do, I'm digging this red over here. I'm gonna make some lines like this. Now, as the paper starts to dry, so we can go back up here to here or here, and if it's looking like it's too light and you want more color, you could add more color to your brush. I'm gonna do some red up here and just add a little more color, and you'll see as the paper starts to dry, the paint won't spread out quite as much, so you get a more defined line. But it's still going to be soft on the edges. Okay, let's do one more real quick.
We have a few more people joining in. If you're joining,
Okay.
you're going to grab your watercolor paper, which is a little bit different than the white cards. And you can see that Debbie has done grids, a 4 grid. This is wet on wet. So you're going to get your paper wet with a clean brush and clean water, and then use your colors to create just a couple fun patterns that you'll be using for your Christmas tree designs. I guess we should have clarified too. These are designs that you'll be using for your Christmas tree cards.
Yes. Okay. Let's do.
Oh, Debbie, we do have a question from Whitney. She asked, can you do wet on wet with other mediums like acrylic paint?
Yeah. That would depend on what you are using for your paper. Like if you're using something like canvas and an acrylic paint, you would have to make the surface really wet, and then make sure that you're using some kind of medium or water. But yes, it would. If you're making it wet enough, it will spread out the same way that watercolor does. You can also do acrylic like on paper. You can use watercolor paper and try different kinds of paints. And there are also, there are so many different kinds of paints. But there are also, I'll just show this to you because it's kind of a fun fact. Actually, I'll have to grab it later because I don't see any. I'll get back to that later. There are watercolor colored pencils, which look just like colored pencils, but if you draw with them on wet paper, it spreads out similar to this, and that can make some really cool effects. Okay, let's do one more of these real quick. Let's do a kind of yellowy green. And I'm gonna use the brush that came with the watercolor set because it's kind of stiffer. And do some things like this. Okay, now I need to soak up some of these little areas where I have too much water so it doesn't run onto the table. And then, so this one, you can see it's getting really faint. So this is where I would go back and add more color now that I can see kind of what's happening. So I'm gonna add some more on top and it will react a little bit differently since the paper is drier. All right. So I'm going to set this aside to dry. And our next one is it's quite similar. It's called dry on wet. And so you do the same thing. You can get your paper wet. But this time you want to have less water in your paintbrush and kind of a higher paint to water ratio. So if you get your brush, get some good color on your brush. And if you need to, you can dab it like this on your paper, your paper towel to get some of the extra water out. So it's just a more concentrated paint. And dab up some of that extra water. And so here you're still, when you draw or paint, you're still going to have soft edges, but it's not going to expand as much as it did on the previous one. So this is a really fun one because you can do a little bit more defined shapes, but still get a soft edge. Another one. And with the wet paper technique, another thing that's really nice about it, I'll just do this as a little example over here, is that you can paint any shape. Like if I wanted to paint a Christmas tree just on here and I wanted it to have some texture in it, I could paint like a triangle or whatever shape I wanted to, and then fill it in. So it would have a hard defined edge around the shape, but then the inside would be soft. So that can be useful. We wouldn't need that today for doing the cards since we're going to cut out our shapes out of this paper. But if you were doing a painting, like say if you wanted to make a card and paint right on the paper and you wanted to have triangle shapes of trees, you could paint. This paper won't be great for holding water, but you could paint a triangle on here and then drop your color into it and it'll stay right in that shape. Okay, let's do some blue. And here I'm gonna work on mixing some different colors. So in my little palette, I'm going to mix blue and green to get sort of a turquoise. And try to get it a stronger color with more paint and less water. Just gonna make some little dots in here. And as you can see, it's gonna be a little more defined than when we did dots over here. You can really have fun with mixing color too. Sometimes if you try really unexpected combinations, like if I mixed blue with, if I mix blue and red, it's gonna give us a nice purpley color. But you can try all different things to see what you come up with. Oh, I like the purple idea. Let's do more purple for the next one. Okay, down here. My brush is really wet, so I'm going to dry it a little bit. Okay. Let's do. So with watercolor, you can either mix your color on the palette ahead of time, so you could make a purple on the palette like this. Or you can mix color as you're painting it. So I could put some blue on my paper and then drop some red in with it. So it sort of mixes on the wet paper. Okay, I'm going to go back up here to this stripy one and add in some more stripes. As it's drying, and these stripes will be even more defined. All right. Okay, and I'm going to set this aside to dry. We have one more to do, and then we're going to make our reindeer cards. So the last one, if you can guess, is dry on dry. And this one is fun. It can be a little tricky. This is where actually, if you ever have some really old paintbrushes around that are really stiff and kind of crackly, that can work really well for this technique, like this kind of thing. It's harder with a nice soft brush, but it will still work. So you take your brush, you need to get some paint in it, but you really need to get the right amount of water to paint ratio so that you can draw on here and it's going to make the texture of the paintbrush is going to come through. So you can see sort of make some nice natural looking textures. Okay. And you can do the same technique, but use the brush in different ways to make different patterns. So I'm going to do some, and this could sort of look like branches on a tree, Christmas tree branches. I'm going to add some red on top of this orange to give it a little more depth in there. Okay, And I think that this brush that came with the paints would be a good one for this because it's pretty stiff. Let's give that a try. Oh yeah, it's nice and crisp. And this is where you can really experiment and have fun. And also things other than paintbrushes work well for this technique too. Like you could use a tree branch, or you could dip like a twig into paint and kind of draw and make this really nice scratchy line and texture. You could even dip things like pine cones or other things you find into paint and use them to paint a nice, lovely, scratchy texture. Okay, let's do one more on here. Let's see what color. Maybe some, I'm gonna try this pink again. Do some like stippling. And I'm gonna add some, actually I'm gonna add some orange to that one. I think that would look nice. All right. Okay. So I think we're gonna set this aside to dry now. And while that dries, we're gonna make our reindeer cards. So if you haven't had time to finish all of your squares, don't worry. You can do it later and finish later. But we'll set them to dry, and then after the reindeer card, then you can work on either finishing painting more, as well as cutting these shapes out to make your Christmas tree cards. So let's move on to this super fun reindeer.
Any questions
Alright.
before we move
Oh
on?
yeah, good idea. Any questions?
You can unmute yourself.
All right,
We're good.
we're good. Okay, so for the reindeer card, this is gonna be fun. Might be a little messy. I recommend you being able to wash your hands really soon after this. So we're gonna use our thumbs to make some reindeer, and here's what we're gonna end up with. So you need your thumb, and you need to stick it in the water jug to get it wet, and then press it down on your brown paint here. And swirl it around a little bit so that you have some nice paint. And you get to choose however many reindeer you would like to put on your card. I filled this one up with a bunch. And here you can see how many eyes you have. You can decide which reindeer you want to give eyes and noses to. So you just take your thumb, squash it down like that. And I'm gonna make a whole family.
We have one person asking to leave the sample up like in this corner of
Yeah.
the screen so they can be inspired.
Good idea. There we go. Okay. All right. Okay. I cannot guarantee how non-toxic these paints are, so make sure you wash your hands really well. And if you have a marker or a pencil or something, draw little antlers on. Like this. It will dry pretty quickly, and when it dries, you can, might not be quite ready, maybe a little wet. You can put ears and eyes and nose. And then for your Rudolph, you can choose if you want to give Rudolph a big fluffy nose or a sparkly red nose. And you can glue eyes on as well. Cool. Yeah, you can write a message if you want. So there you go. Are there any questions about the reindeer? You good? Okay. I think now I am going to start showing you how to make the Christmas tree cards, the Christmas tree part. And you can continue if you still have some painted areas that you need to finish, or if you want to go back on top and make some more layers on or add more colors. And I think you might even have like an extra piece of watercolor paper in your kit. And with that, you could do more practices, or if you wanted to try anything else, any other textures or colors, feel free to use up all of your paper. And when your paper is dry enough, what you will do, so I have some here that are already dry. And they should be dry. In fact, the one that we did first, the wet on dry, this is actually dry enough to go ahead and use. So this is where you also get to be creative and do this however you want. And I did a couple different types. I did one with a lot of little trees, and I did one with just like 3 bigger trees. You also could do something, you could cut circles instead of triangles and make them into like Christmas ornaments. Or you could cut them in squares or rectangles and draw a bow on it and have a Christmas gift arrangement. But I'm gonna go ahead and do trees. So once they're kind of dry, I just put them apart and then cut out whatever shape that I want out of here. So this one, I'm going to do a big one. 3 bigger trees. 2. That's real quick. Okay. Oh, if you happen to have a little scrap piece of paper around, that's helpful for when you're gluing. You can take this just so that you don't get glue all over your table. All right, and then I just took a marker and did a little kind of scribble to make the trunk like that. Then I wrote my message. So there you go. So I think now we have time that you can work on making those. And if you have any questions, you can ask questions. And I think Jay and Leanne maybe had a little chat time too for questions and whatnot. And I'm going to keep making things so you can watch me make more cards and you can work in making your cards. But yeah, I'm going to turn it over to Jay and Leanne as well. So have fun making. Let me know if you have questions.
Thanks, Debbie. Yeah, so feel free to leave your questions in the chat, and then I'm going to introduce Jay. So Jay Hawking is our Director of Operations over at Water for Good. He's going to share a little bit about Christmas traditions and maybe more just traditions in the Central African Republic, a little bit about his story. He grew up in the CAR. And for those of you not familiar with Water for Good, he's just going to kind of share some fun facts. All right, Jay, take it over to these crafting kings and queens.
Thanks, Leanne. As Leanne said, my name's Jay, and I'm Debbie's husband. Debbie's upstairs. I'm downstairs in the same house here. And I grew up in the Central African Republic. I was there from when I was 7 years old until I was 17. So I spent a good amount of time there in a small town called Yaloke. And then I started working for Water for Good about 10 years ago. So, which allows me to work back in the same country that I grew up in, which is a lot of fun. But Leanne asked if I could maybe talk just a little bit about what it would be like in Central Africa at this time of year around the holidays. So I thought I'd share a little bit about that. So Central Africa, as you probably may have guessed, doesn't have snow, and the weather doesn't get that cold there. But we do have a rainy season and a dry season there. So roughly the rainy season is the same as our summers, and the dry season is the same as our winters here. So they're just now getting into the beginning of dry season. And in dry season, it usually goes a long time, a couple months without any rain at all. And everything dries out, the savanna, all the grasslands that have been growing all summer. And, there's really high grass. It'll be like 8 or 9 feet tall sometimes. That all dries out. And usually there's big brush fires that burn, and that all gets burnt off. So a lot of times once you get into like December and January in Central Africa, if you live in one of those small towns, there'll be lots of soot that falls from all the brush fires. It's like this little black dusting on everything. So it's kind of weird, a little bit different than our winters here. But it's also a lot drier, which is often kind of nice. I liked it when I was younger there because I really didn't like the hot and humid, but I didn't mind so much when it was hot and dry, which the winters there are that way. So that's quite nice. It's also a lot easier to get around in Central Africa since the roads, most of them aren't paved. So for Water for Good, the dry season, the winter period is the time when we try to get the most amount of work done that we can. We have really heavy drill rigs and supply trucks that have to get around the country. So it's really nice when it's dry and the trucks aren't getting stuck in the mud and we have to winch them out and that kind of stuff. It's just a lot easier to get stuff done when it's dry out. So that's part of, for Water for Good, what the winter looks like. Christmas is, it's celebrated there. There's, it's a good percentage of the population there is Christian. There's a lot of churches there, and they do a lot of Christmas celebrations, but it probably looks a lot different than ours here. They don't have There's no snow theme. There's not really much of a Santa Claus thing going on. Christmas is mostly a church celebration where the churches will have, they might, like the youth groups might have like all night celebrations at the church. They'll have a big meal together at the church, something like that. So that's mostly how Christmas is celebrated. And our own staff at Water for Good, we usually host a big party for them and their families, have a big meal together, and everyone dresses up nice and comes to our big office center there and has a big meal together. So it's a big time of festivities for our teams as well. And a chance for a lot of our team in Central Africa work in a town other than where their families are. It's a pretty big country. It's like the size of Texas. And so a lot of our staff end up spending a lot of time working on job sites that are far away from their families. So it's nice at Christmas time, they get a nice long break, get to go home and be with family for Christmas, New Year's, before we, hit the road again in January and try to get new projects in. So that's a little bit what Christmas is like, mostly centered around food and a big party at the church for people there. And yeah, it's a pretty nice time. When I was a kid there, I tried to go to one of those all-night Christmas things with, I was in like, it's not really a youth group, it's kind of like a little bit like Awana or Boy Scouts kind of. There's one of those things, and they had an all-night one. But I went for, I think I lasted till like 1 a.m. before my parents came and picked me up. And I was one of those kids that didn't like doing all-night things. If I'd been in the States, I would have been calling my parents to pick me up. So, but it was a fun time there. I don't know if there's anything else you guys have questions about as far as Central African culture or what the country's like. Otherwise, I'll share a little bit just in general about Water for Good. Most of you probably are already our supporters and know a little bit about it, but any questions or anything about Central African Republic or what it's like to live there?
Derek wants to know if they exchange presents.
They do some presents. It's not nearly to the level of the USA side of things. I think it's mostly parents buying presents for their kids, a couple presents, but it's not really the whole, definitely not to the US level of gift giving. And they do like, I'm trying to think other celebrations. They don't really do Halloween. There's no like dressing up and going around trick-or-treating, none of that. But New Year's, there's a tradition in like the good sized towns where kids will come around first thing in the morning and sing songs and ask for candy at your door. But it'll be like these mass hordes of kids asking for candy to celebrate the new year. So it's kind of like they took trick-or-treating and it does involve singing on their end. They make up songs every year. Most of the songs involve like a tagline of like, give us candy right now, please, in the song. So that's kind of a fun thing they do.
Thanks, Jay.
All right, and I'll maybe just talk a little bit about what Water for Good does for those of you who don't know, try and give a really brief, big picture overview about what we are. So Water for Good is an organization that's trying to solve water poverty, basically people who don't have enough access to clean water, and it causes lots of health problems for them. And it also just takes up a lot of their day. They're walking long distances to go get water. It's hard for kids, especially because they're missing out on school and they're having to work pretty hard to go get that water. It's really heavy to carry. So we're working in the Central African Republic to try to provide people with clean water. And we do that through two main ways. One, we drill deep wells and put a hand pump on it or a foot pump so they can, in small communities, they can pump the water out of the ground and have water access in their village and not have to walk, to the nearest river or stream. And then the second way we do it, which we've been doing for maybe 3 or 4 years now, is we drill that same well, but instead of putting a manual pump that takes a lot of work to get the water out, we put an electric pump on it with solar panels, and that water gets pumped up into this big, looks like a silo, like a grain silo, gets pumped up into there. Our silos hold about 8,000 to 10,000 gallons of water, And then throughout the day, there's pipes that take that water and distribute it out to locations in the community. So each one of those towers might serve like 4 or 5 little community water points where people can bring their water jugs and get water there. So those are the main things that we do. We've installed about a little over 1,000 of the manual pumps, and those the water points that are fed by the big reservoirs that we're talking about. We've put in about 100 of those so far. So putting in more and more of those as well. So it's about somewhere in the ballpark of 500,000 people who are getting water, thanks to all the people who are supporting the work of Water for Good and supporting our team in Central Africa and allowing them to get all these projects done. So it's a really enjoyable organization to work for, because you get to see the results of what you're doing really quickly. Makes a huge difference when you're in a community that doesn't have access to water. You go in a few years later and see, see that same community with 4 or 5 water points, and just the level of access to water has greatly reduced a lot of the health problems, and just people have a lot more time with not spending an hour every day walking to go get water. So it's just a really, really big change in people's quality of life. So we're really thankful that we have so many supporters in the US who help make this work possible year after year, and excited to see what happens next year as we try and expand and do even more work. Are there any questions or anything about what Water for Good does, or why we do it, or who we are, anything like that? None at all. I had a question. I saw on the video feed here, there was a pretty epic pumpkin pie versus cherry pie fight, and I was wondering which one won out on that. I was rooting for the pumpkin pie.
Cherry pie.
Cherry pie one. Nice job. I love those hats.
Jay, I'm curious how many people work for Water for Good in the States and in Central Africa and anywhere else in the world.
Yeah, we got about 130 people in Central Africa, and we're kind of with those new systems that we're putting in, with the reservoir and all the water points. Each one of those more or less requires one more employee to help manage it ongoing, because a lot of what Water for Good does is not just install those systems, but help the communities manage them long term. So so Water for Good's 130 right now. Next year, we'll probably have another 15 or 20 employees in Central Africa. So it's growing at a pretty quick pace right now, just to keep up with the projects we're putting in. In the US, I don't know, Leanne, what do we have? 12, 13, something like that?
Yeah, I think total
15?
it's like 19, but
Okay. 19, and that's international staff. Everyone's in the US pretty much. We're spread around. There's 2 of us here in Portland, Oregon. Got some in the Midwest, in Indiana, 1 guy in Ohio, some in North Carolina, so spread around a little bit. And then we have 1 person in France, working from France right now. So we're all working remotely.
all right, if you're feeling bold, you should hold up your favorite card so far to the camera so we can see what you're working with. Anyone? Aaron, I see you over there.
Oh, that's so cute. I love it.
Love the reindeer.
Adorable. Love it.
Good job, Carrie. Oh, look at those reindeer. I love it. Jenny, I like that orange in between the green. That's a good combo.
Oh, that's so nice.
Faye, did everyone leave you? You're like,
Oh, that
No,
looks
the boys had to
Oh,
leave.
hi. Hi. Hi, hi.
But show 'em- There's Gwen. You say hi to Aunt Debbie? You see Aunt Debbie there?
Oh, Hi, I'm Debbie.
Hi.
Hi, look at this.
Oh, nice. Look at the Allens over there.
Gwen looks pretty excited to have those sharp scissors. Zach, were you abandoned as well? You doing cards by yourself now? Yeah.
They got the M&Ms out and I cannot compete.
Amazing.
Lilies.
Oh, nice. Ooh, those are some nice antlers. Like those. Mm.
These are- I'm not
Yeah,
even
they are.
showing mine. I don't like mine.
Aw,
I'll send you mine, Debbie.
okay. I'm trying to think what Christmas ornaments look like.
Yeah, you're gonna get a lot of these.
Can I cut this one?
Yeah, you can cut any of these.
How are those Colorado ones doing? Those cards.
Send them one each.
See it,
day.
Olivia. You got yours? Ooh, looking good. I only get to see Joanna's.
All right, so we are right at an hour. Debbie, you are nailing this. Is there any more questions? Obviously, you can keep working on your cards.
I just want to keep going and making more. Oh my God.
Well, again, thank you all for who have joined. If you're watching this recorded version, thank you for joining us too. We are going to try to make some sort of event, something, and we're not going to make Debbie do this every time. We'll spare her. But so if you have a talent that you think you should share with us, please let me know. Our next little event will be this spring, summertime. So there are no more questions. I don't think we can go ahead and end this recording. And thank you all again for joining us. And please have fun sending out those cards and tag us on social media if you end up. You should be proud enough to take pictures of your cards and send those out.
Yeah. Thanks so much, everybody. This was super fun.
Yeah,
Thank
thank you.
you.
Yeah, presents and ornaments. And
Mhm.
trees. Yeah.
Ah, man, I'm gonna have to do some more papers.
Yeah. Yeah, these are fun.
I gotta go get my stampers and put Merry Christmas, Merry Christmas.
Joanna, I like that. Those are fun.
What are you gonna stick that on, Gwen?
Mhm.
Maybe I'll mix up my reindeer with some trees.
When I decorate one of these with all those pieces, you can use some of these trees to decorate it too.
All right, everyone. So we're gonna go ahead and close this down. Any more questions? Thank you, everyone, for participating. I love it.
Oh.
That was a perfect ending. All right, Merry Christmas, everyone. Thank you so much.
All right.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Bye.
Merry Christmas.
Isn't that our friends?